Carter Godwin Woodson, known today as the father of Black history, was a man whose vision and determination changed how the world understood the past. Born in 1875 in Virginia, just a decade after the end of the Civil War, Woodson came into a world still deeply scarred by slavery. His parents, James and Anne Eliza Woodson, had both been enslaved before emancipation, and though they lived free by the time of his birth, they struggled against poverty and the weight of systemic racism that continued to define Black life in America. From these humble beginnings, Woodson grew into one of the most influential historians of the 20th century, a man who dedicated his life to documenting, preserving, and teaching the history of people of African descent. Woodson's childhood was marked by hardship. He was the son of farmers and worked from a very young age to help support his family. His access to formal education was limited because he had to spend much of his time working in the fields and in coal mines to earn money. Despite these obstacles, he demonstrated an insatiable thirst for learning. He taught himself to read and write, studied on his own whenever he could, and eventually entered high school at the late age of 20. Once he finally had the opportunity to focus on education, he excelled at a remarkable pace, completing a 4-year high school curriculum in just 2 years. After high school, Woodson pursued higher education with relentless determination. He enrolled at Berea College in Kentucky, one of the few institutions in the South at the time that admitted Black students. Later, he attended the University of Chicago, where he earned both a bachelor's and master's degree. But his academic journey did not end there. Woodson made history himself when he earned a Ph.D. in history from Harvard University in 1912, becoming only the second African American to do so, after W. His dissertation examined the role of Black people in the American Revolution, and through this work, he began to challenge the prevailing narrative of history that consistently ignored or minimized the contributions of African Americans. Even with his groundbreaking achievement, Woodson realized that the halls of academia remained overwhelmingly hostile or indifferent to serious study of Black history. At the time, mainstream historical scholarship was dominated by Eurocentric perspectives that portrayed Black people as passive participants in history, rather than as active agents who shaped societies, nations, and culture. Popular textbooks often ignored African Americans altogether, and when they were mentioned, it was typically in ways that reinforced racist stereotypes or justified inequality. Woodson understood that this distortion of history was not just an intellectual failing, it was a social and political weapon used to keep Black people marginalized. He believed that if the history of African Americans could be properly studied, recorded, and taught, it would provide both a sense of pride and a foundation for equality. Determined to correct the omissions and distortions of the historical record, Woodson devoted his career to documenting the achievements and struggles of Black people in America and throughout the world. In 1915, he co-founded the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History, now known as the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. The organization's mission was to promote the study and appreciation of Black history, not just among scholars, but also in schools and community. That same year, Woodson launched the Journal of Negro History, a groundbreaking publication that became the first scholarly journal dedicated to African American history. Through this platform, he and other scholars published research that highlighted the central role of Black people in shaping history, from ancient Africa to modern America. Woodson was tireless in his work. He traveled widely, conducted research, and wrote extensive. His most famous book, The Miseducation of the Negro, published in 1933, remains one of the most influential works in African American studies. In this book, Woodson argued that the education system in the United States systematically ignored and devalued Black history and culture, leaving generations of Black people without knowledge of their heritage and contribution. He believed that this miseducation perpetuated racial inferiority by conditioning Black students to see themselves through the lens of a society that dismissed their work. His call to action was clear. True education had to include the history of African people, and it had to empower rather than diminish. Perhaps Woodson's most enduring legacy is his creation of Negro History Week in He chose the second week of February to coincide with the birthdays of Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass, figures who were widely celebrated in the Black community. Woodson envisioned this week as a time when schools and communities across the country would focus on the contributions of African Americans, integrating Black history into the broader narrative of American history. He encouraged teachers, churches, organizations, and students to engage in lectures, performances, and discussions that highlighted achievements in literature, politics, science, and social progress. Negro History Week was groundbreaking because it institutionalized the celebration of Black history at a national level. It was not just about acknowledging famous individuals, it was about recognizing the collective contributions of African Americans and challenging the myth that they had no role in building modern civilization. Over time, the week grew in popularity and influence, and in 1976, during the nation's bicentennial, it was expanded into Black History Month, which is now celebrated annually in the United States and other countries around the world. This development fulfilled Woodson's vision of ensuring that the history of African Americans would never again be relegated to the margins. Despite his monumental contributions, Woodson was often a solitary figure. He was known for his strict discipline, his insistence on accuracy, and his refusal to compromise his vision. He lived modestly, dedicating nearly all of his time and energy to his work, rather than personal wealth or recognition. While he collaborated with other scholars and activists, he often stood apart because of his uncompromising belief that the study of history had to remain free from political or financial influence. This independence sometimes made him a controversial figure, but it also allowed him to maintain the integrity of his mission. Woodson's impact extended far beyond academia. By insisting that Black history was essential to understanding the American story, he helped inspire generations of students, teachers, and activists. His work laid the intellectual foundation for the civil rights movement, as leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. and others drew on a sense of historical identity and pride that Woodson had worked so hard to cultivate. His emphasis on education as a tool for liberation continues to resonate today, as schools and communities grapple with how history is taught and whose stories are included. Carter G. Woodson died in 1950, but his legacy has only grown stronger in the decades since. The Association for the Study of African American Life and History continues to thrive, and the Journal of Negro History, now renamed the Journal of African American History, remains a respected academic publication. His ideas about the importance of history in shaping identity and social change have become foundational to African American studies programs around the world. Each year, during Black History Month, millions of people celebrate and reflect on the very ideas he championed nearly a century ago. What makes Woodson's story remarkable is not just his accomplishments, but the barriers he overcame. Born to parents who had once been enslaved, denied access to consistent education until adulthood, and facing a society determined to erase or distort the contributions of his people, he rose to become one of the most important historians of his time. He showed that history is not neutral, but a battlefield of ideas, where inclusion or exclusion can shape the way people see themselves and their place in the world. By insisting on the recognition of Black history, he gave future generations the tools to fight inequality and claim their rightful place in the human story. Carter G. Woodson's life stands as a testament to the power of knowledge and the importance of telling the full truth about the past. He believed deeply that understanding history was not just an academic exercise, but a necessity for freedom, dignity, and progress. His work remains a reminder that history belongs to everyone, and that no people's story should ever be silent. Today, whenever students open a textbook that includes African civilizations, or celebrate the achievements of Black inventors, writers, scientists, and leaders, they are living out the vision of a man who dedicated his life to ensuring that Black history would never again be forgotten. Carter G. Woodson's journey from the coal mines of West Virginia to the halls of Harvard University is one of the most remarkable stories of resilience and determination in American history. Born in 1875 to formerly enslaved parents, Woodson grew up in a world still deeply scarred by slavery and the inequalities that followed emancipation. His family lived in poverty, and as a child, he was expected to contribute to their survival through manual labor. This meant that for much of his youth, he did not have the luxury of consistent schooling. Instead, he worked on the family farm and later in the dangerous and grueling coal mines, where boys and men spent long hours underground extracting coal for little pay. The work was exhausting, the environment harsh, and the opportunities for advancement almost non-existent. For many, this would have been the entirety of their lives, yet for Woodson, it was only the beginning. Though his access to formal education was delayed, his hunger for learning was insatiable. He taught himself to read and write at home, borrowing books whenever he could, and he developed a reputation among his peers for his curiosity and intellect. Unlike many who might have surrendered to the limits imposed by poverty, he saw education as his pathway to freedom and dignity. He was determined not to let his circumstances define his future. At the age of 20, much later than most students, he finally enrolled in high school. But once he had the opportunity, he advanced at lightning speed, completing the 4-year curriculum in just 2 years. His academic brilliance was undeniable, and his teachers recognized that he had an extraordinary gift. After finishing high school, Woodson attended Berea College in Kentucky, one of the rare institutions at that time that welcomed black students. From there he began building the foundation of what would become an extraordinary academic career. He later pursued studies at the University of Chicago, where he earned both a bachelor's and a master's degree, further proving his determination to excel despite the barriers around him. His work ethic and intelligence set him apart, but it was his vision, his understanding that education was more than personal advancement, that truly defined him. He believed education had to serve as a tool of empowerment for his community and as a weapon against the ignorance and prejudice that plagued society. Woodson's academic journey culminated in 1912, when he became only the second African American in history to earn a Ph.D. from Harvard University, following in the footsteps of W.E.B. Du Bois. His doctoral research focused on the role of black people in the American Revolution, a subject that directly challenged the prevailing historical narratives of the time. At Harvard, he found himself surrounded by scholars and historians who often dismissed the very notion that African Americans had made meaningful contributions to history. Many of his white peers and professors subscribed to racist ideologies that sought to minimize or deny the role of black people in shaping the United States. Woodson's presence and his scholarship were a challenge to that worldview. He was not content simply to prove himself. He wanted to prove, through evidence and documentation, that black history was integral to the American story. The significance of his journey from coal miner to Harvard scholar cannot be overstated. It symbolized the transformative power of education and demonstrated that intellectual brilliance could emerge from even the harshest beginnings. It also revealed his extraordinary persistence. Many people in his position might have accepted a life limited by poverty and racial barriers, but Woodson refused. He believed that knowledge could break chains, not only for himself, but for all black people who had been excluded from the nation's historical narrative. His journey was not just personal, it was political, cultural, and symbolic. It embodied the idea that education could be a form of liberation, a path toward rewriting the way black people were seen both in their own eyes and in the eyes of society. By the time he earned his doctorate, Woodson had developed the core philosophy that would guide his life's work. He understood that the absence of black people from history books was not accidental, but deliberate, a way to reinforce systems of oppression. His own trajectory showed him the power of self-knowledge and affirmed his belief that teaching history was not simply about memorizing facts, but about shaping identity and self-worth. From the coal mines to Harvard, his story was proof that with determination and vision, barriers could be overcome. Yet he never saw his own success as an end in itself. Instead, he dedicated the rest of his life to ensuring that others, especially young black students, would see themselves in the story of humanity and find pride in their heritage. The narrative of Carthage. Woodson's rise reminds us of the countless untold stories of people who, despite hardship, have transformed their circumstances through persistence and belief in something great. It underscores how extraordinary it was for a man born just a decade after slavery, denied early education, and forced to work in coal mines, to rise to the intellectual heights of Harvard University. His journey is not just a testament to his brilliance, but a reminder of how much potential lies within those whom society often seeks to ignore. His life demonstrates that history is not only about the powerful and privileged, but also about those who climb from the harshest conditions to shape the destiny of nations. Carthage. Woodson's path from the coal mines to Harvard was the foundation for his mission to ensure that black history would never again be erased, forgotten, or misrepresented. It was the beginning of a legacy that would inspire generations to come. Carter G. Woodson recognized early in his career that the way history was being taught and written was deeply flawed. In classrooms across America, students were being presented with a version of the past that glorified European achievement, while either ignoring or outright distorting the roles played by black people. For Woodson, this was not just an academic oversight, It was a dangerous practice that stripped African Americans of their dignity and perpetuated a false sense of inferiority. He understood that when a people are written out of history, their contributions devalued or erased, they are denied the chance to fully participate in society with pride and confidence. History, he argued, was not a neutral record, but a powerful tool that could either uplift or oppress, depending on how it was told. At the time, mainstream historians and institutions either denied African American contributions altogether or reduced them to narrow, degrading stereotypes. The myth of black inferiority was reinforced not only by law and policy, but also by the very books students read in school. Textbooks routinely excluded figures like Crispus Attucks, the first casualty of the American Revolution, or Benjamin Banneker, the mathematician and astronomer who helped design Washington, D.C. Instead, they portrayed slavery as a benign institution, or suggested that black people had no significant role in building the nation. This distorted version of the past shaped the minds of both white and black students. White students grew up believing in their own superiority, while black students were taught to see themselves as passive and unworthy of recognition. Woodson challenged this exclusion with a conviction that was revolutionary for his time. He argued that accurate history was essential to the progress of African Americans and to the moral integrity of the nation itself. He believed that if African Americans could see the truth of their ancestors' achievements, they would gain a sense of pride and self-worth that no laws or prejudices could erase. At the same time, he believed that white Americans needed to be confronted with the reality that black people were integral to the country's development, from its earliest days through every stage of its growth. In his view, the distortion of history was not only a crime against African Americans, but a distortion of the American story as a whole. Through his scholarship, Woodson began documenting the countless ways black people had contributed to human civilization. He researched and published works that highlighted African civilizations before European colonization, demonstrating that black people had a history rich in culture, governance, art and science long before slavery. He uncovered the roles of black soldiers in the American Revolution, the Civil War and World War I, pushing back against the erasure that cast them as absent from the nation's most defining struggle. His work also drew attention to black inventors, educators, business leaders, and community builders who had helped shape America but had been denied recognition. For Woodson, uncovering and amplifying these contributions was not simply about setting the record straight. It was about giving African Americans the intellectual tools to demand their rightful place in society. In 1915, to ensure that this mission would extend beyond his own writings, Woodson co-founded the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History. The organization became a cornerstone in the effort to preserve, research, and disseminate accurate accounts of black history. It gave scholars a platform to publish work that mainstream institutions ignored and created a community committed to dismantling the myths of racial inferiority. By founding the Journal of Negro History, Woodson provided an outlet for rigorous research that elevated voices and perspectives otherwise excluded from academic spaces. These institutions were his answer to the gatekeeping of mainstream academia and a direct challenge to the status quo. Woodson often argued that education without true history was dangerous because it created individuals disconnected from their roots and susceptible to accepting systems of inequality. This idea was most forcefully expressed in his 1933 book, The Miseducation of the Negro, where he explained how the American educational system had been designed to indoctrinate rather than liberate. By denying black people the knowledge of their history, schools reinforced submission and self-doubt. In his view, liberation could only come when people knew the truth about themselves and their ancestors. That truth had the power to transform not just individuals but entire communities. His challenge to historical exclusion was not universally welcomed. Many in the academic and political establishment dismissed his work, and even some within the black community questioned his insistence on the centrality of history. But Woodson remained firm, convinced that his mission was vital for the survival and advancement of his people. He saw history as a living force, one that shaped identity, culture, and future possibility. By reclaiming the narrative, he sought to empower African Americans to fight for their rights and redefine how they were viewed by themselves and others. The impact of his efforts reverberated far beyond his lifetime. The institutions he built and the ideas he promoted laid the groundwork for the later expansion of Negro History Week into what we now celebrate as Black History Month. His insistence on accurate, inclusive history influenced generations of scholars, educators, and activists, who continued the struggle to ensure that Black contributions were recognized in schools, universities, and public discourse. Today, his challenge to historical exclusion remains as urgent as ever, reminding us that the stories we tell about the past shape the world we live in and the future we imagine. Carter G. Woodson's determination to correct the historical record was more than an academic pursuit. It was an act of resistance, a declaration of dignity, and a gift to generations who could look back at history and finally see themselves as full participants in the human story. By exposing the exclusion and distortion of Black history, he gave voice to a silenced past and ensured that the achievements of his people would never again be hidden from view. His work continues to stand as a powerful reminder that the fight for equality is not only about laws and rights, but also about the stories we choose to tell and the truths we refuse to forget.